I'm Terrence Mashingaidze. I'm a historian, and I'm based at the Midland State University, where I'm also the dean there in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities.
May you just share a summary of the chapters that you wrote in this book that we are going to be launching today?
Okay, my chapter is a comparative analysis of the Tonga's experiences in the aftermath of the Kariba Dam. As you are aware, we had the Tongas on both sides of the Zambezi River. That is, some Tongas on the Zimbabwean side and some Tongas on the Zambian side. So I was trying to explore how these different Tonga constituencies were treated by their respective colonial governments in the aftermath of the construction of the Kariba Dam. So what I'm presenting is the paradox of a single dam that triggered different relocation processes on both sides of the Kariba Dam. So what we noticed that on the other side, on the Zambian side of the Kariba Dam, the colonial government, that is in Northern Rhodesia, the colonial government was slightly sensitive to the Tongas there. So the Tongas in Northern Rhodesia, led by people like Hezekiah Habanyana, were consulted, and they managed to salvage some concessions, for example, with reference to fishing opportunities on the emergent Kariba Dam. And also there was some compensation on the northern side. But on the other side, here in Zimbabwe, which was Southern Rhodesia, the colonial government was imperious, was not consultative, was we can say was arrogant, because after all this was a settler colony. So the settlers here were too domineering, too arrogant. They were not willing to bargain and factor in the concerns of the marginalized Tongas. So the Tongas here in Zimbabwe were not consulted about the displacement process. They were simply told to go high up there on the upland plateaus in what is now Binga and part of Nyaminyami. So that's where they moved. So they left their homes adjacent to the Zambezi River without any compensation. By the way, prior to the Kariba Dam, they were living along in linear settlements along the Zambezi River, so their livelihoods were a bit secure. They were practicing flood recession agriculture, and there was no tsetse fly in the Zambezi floodplains because of the high humidity in that area. Tsetse do not thrive in areas with high humidity. So the people were pushed up to the uplands of Binga, to the Binga plateaus, where the temperatures are high. The areas are also tsetse prone. So that means the people could not keep up livestock up there, and their livelihoods got precarious when they moved up north. And the bottom line is there was no consultation, there was no compensation, unlike what happened on the western side of the Zambezi in Northern Rhodesia.
What can we learn from the historical case of the Kariba Dam in terms of development-induced displacements today?
Okay, what we note particularly from the Zimbabwean angle is that the Kariba Dam is rather a test case of poorly planned post-relocation processes or development-induced displacements, in the sense that in the 1950s, mid-1950s, when the World Bank decided to fund this dam project, we find that during that time, dam constructors did not carry out environmental and social impact assessments. They would just focus on developing or establishing dams so that they could trigger development. Remember, the Kariba Dam was a is a hydro generating dam. So it was meant to generate electricity which would spur development in the Central African Federation. That is in the three countries of Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, and Nyasaland, now Malawi. So Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia was what we can term the main engine in this federation, because this was a settler colony. It had a high number of whites, so most of the developments that took place in the context of the Federation happened here. And in fact, the construction of the Kariba Dam happened because of this demographic preponderance of the Rhodesian whites, because there were debates about constructing the dam in the Central African Federation at the Kafue Gorge or the Kariba Gorge. But then the Kafue Gorge was going to be cheaper. But then the Southern Rhodesian whites, who were much more dominant, managed to ensure that the dam got constructed on the Kariba Gorge, which was favorable to Southern Rhodesia. So, with reference to the Kariba Dam, we find that there were no social and economic impact assessments, so that was wrong. And then secondly, there was no compensation for the people who were displaced. Then third, there was no consultation of the people displaced. Then fourth, there were no post-relocation structures for the people who were displaced. In fact, when you engage elderly women among the Tonga on the Zimbabwean side, and even men, they claim that they were told by the district commissioner there, Mr. Cockcroft, whom the Tonga called Skanyana, that the water will follow you. The reason why the Tonga always say that we were told that water would follow you is that they are living in arid, dry-prone areas. There wasn't any major attempt to provide them with water, to sink as many boreholes as possible so that the people would eke out sustainable livelihoods. So the Kariba Dam was poorly planned and is a test case of how not to do these projects. But of course, in the long term, we also find that some of the challenges that we encountered in the context of the Kariba Dam still persist. For example, dam constructors or major project developers, whether mines, forests, dams, do not factor in compensation. But of course, the good thing now is that most major financiers of dams, including the World Bank itself, the African Development Bank, have now reconsidered their position. They are now saying that whenever there is a major project, compensation should be factored in. But here and there, we find that those things are flouted.
So besides resettlement and compensation, what are sustainable and long-term benefits that affected communities should derive from such large-scale projects?
Okay, the key point with development-induced displacements is that compensation is good, but it should not be once-off. The only way we can come up with sustainable benefits for people who are displaced is when we have what we term profit-sharing mechanisms. For example, the Kariba Dam is a hydro-generating plant. It generates a lot of revenue by selling electricity to the Zimbabwean plateau, to the towns, the industries, the mines, etc., etc. So it generates a lot of revenue. So if we are to factor in a compensation sharing scheme, what it means is that some of the dividends, some of the profits generated from these major projects should be given to the displaced communities to ensure that they have sustainable livelihoods. So as long as a project that triggered DID exists, the profits emerging thereof should also be partly plowed back into the displaced communities. So in the context of the Kariba Dam, there were attempts by the Zambezi River Authority to give, that was in the post-1990s, to give at least 1% of the revenue generated from the Kariba Dam to the Tonga. So some of those monies were used to develop secondary schools and irrigation schemes in Binga. But those were minimal trade-offs, and this was almost 40 years after the construction of the Kariba Dam, 40 years after the displacement of the Tonga. That's when the Zambezi River Authority decided to plow back at least 1% of the revenue that they generated to the Tonga communities. And they crafted this scheme under what they termed Operation Noah Relaunched. And as I've already said, some irrigation schemes were established, and also some schools such as Manjolo benefited from these funds. But I'm not so sure at this point if the scheme still persists. But the bottom line is that when a mine triggers development, when a dam triggers development, the profits generating or emerging from these projects should be plowed back to these communities through a profit sharing scheme, dividend sharing schemes.